So in 2017, we saw a huge shift in the case market, with the majority of cases that released this year aiming for form over function. Things like RGB, tempered glass, and features that aim to be innovative took precedence over functionality, solid airflow, and actually building inside the case. But there are two cases that released this year that, instead of following the market trends, they stand their ground and actually give us enthusiasts what we are looking for. So if you haven't already, meet the Silverstone RL06 and the Fractal Design Meshify C. These two cases have a lot in common, with the main two being that they both look very attractive as a system enclosure and also provide very good airflow and performance at the same time. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at both of these cases and comparing them in terms of overall design, building experience, and of course thermals and noise. Something that you'll love about both of these cases is that they're both very affordable, with the Silverstone RL06 tempered glass coming in at $99 and the Meshify C coming in at just $69 and offering some exceptional value. To Silverstone's credit though, you are getting two extra case fans out of the box when compared to the Meshify C, which in my opinion does justify that price gap of $30. Now let's talk about design, and starting with the size, the RL06 comes in a little bit bigger with an extra 11% in volume, but only an extra 2.5% when comparing footprint. To the eye though, the Meshify C is definitely the more compact enclosure, as it's both shorter in height and length than the RL06. And here they both are compared to the S340 Elite, which is a fairly common mid-tower choice, with the Meshify C again being the most compact out of the three, and the RL06 being almost identical in size to the S340 Elite. Both feature tempered glass side panels on the left-hand side, and the implementation is identical for both, where we have 4 mounting points for the thumb screws, which the panel gently rests on, and they both slightly protrude from the rest of the case and are not flush with the rest of the panels. They are both significantly tinted as well, and I do think this adds a more elegant touch to the enclosures, but it may be a little too much for some. Both come in a matte black version, as you can see, and panel quality feels very similar between the two, and I've got to say I am a big fan of the matte black with tempered glass look. The RL06 has red trim around the front panel, but this also comes in a white and black version if you guys prefer that, whereas the Meshify C just comes in standard black, which is fine by me. The I/O feels very familiar between the enclosures also, with both including 2 USB 3.0 ports and a mic and headphone jack located at the top. The difference between them is that the Meshify C also features a reset switch, and the RL06 also features 2 additional USB 2.0 ports. When looking at the mesh front panel, the Meshify C takes a bit more of an aggressive approach with a triangulated pattern, with each vertex at a varying level of depth, producing a very nice design. The RL06 is a lot simpler in this regard, with just a flat mesh front panel, but the trim around the edges does help it to give just as much presence as the Meshify C, as they are angled. Both feature a magnetic dust filter that sits right on top of the case, and also a dust filter for the power supply as well, the RL06 slotting between these clips here, and the Meshify C sliding and locking itself in through the bottom. In terms of fan and radiator support, both have 240, 280 and 360mm support in the front, and up to a 280 top mounted radiator as well, or 2 120 or 140mm fans at the top if that's preferred. Both have 7 expansion slots and support up to 5 drives as well, with the Meshify C having 3 dedicated slots for 2.5 inch drives at the top here, and also support for another 2 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drives in the bottom drive bay, and the RL06 dedicating 2 slots here for 2.5 inch drives, and allowing up to 2 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drives also in the bottom. Cable management is definitely better in the Meshify C, seeing as it is a slightly wider enclosure and can add deeper channels for the bulk of your cables, whereas the RL06 is fairly flat with no real dedicated channels or cable routing at all. Now let's talk about the system that we'll be building inside both of these cases to accurately test and compare. I wanted to test 2 very powerful processors which rely on solid airflow, So this time around, we're going with the Ryzen 7 1700 and also borrowing the GTX 1080 Ti from my main editing system. By the way, the R7 1700 will have a very slight overclock of 3.75 GHz at 1.3 volts for testing. We're locking those into the Asus Strix B350F motherboard, and in terms of CPU cooling, I'm going to be using the stock Wraith Spire cooler that comes with the Ryzen 7 processor. With this, the CPU will definitely have to rely on decent airflow to keep things under control, and honestly, most Ryzen users are probably using the stock cooler anyway, so it should give us some useful insight. I'll include the full system in the description as well, guys, so feel free to check that out. And something else that I thought would be pretty interesting was to add in the thermal testing of an open test bench system. So essentially just the entire system assembled on my desk, and theoretically this should give us the best cooling performance, but it will be interesting to see by how much and if that actually is the case. Building in both of the systems was pretty good, but the Meshify C definitely takes the cake here. Where the Silverstone RL06 had a random sheet of A4 paper with foreign diagrams for the build guide, the Meshify C had a perfectly presented booklet which included clear colored diagrams, letting you know everything about the enclosure. Where the RL06 had a single bag of mixed screws for everything, the Meshify C had these separated and were much easier to identify. Where the RL06 had fairly lackluster cable management at the rear, the Meshify C makes everything feel easy and tidy without any effort at all. Now, I'm not bashing Silverstone here, and honestly, I could have said this about any of the cases that I have here for testing, such as the S340 Elite, the Corsair Spec 04, or even my own Ncase M1. It's just that Fractal Design really take the user experience a step further here, and it's really worth mentioning because the small details like this are important. Alright, enough of that, let's talk about the thermals, starting off with the CPU load tests. Also guys, with the Meshify C, we will also be adding 2 front intake fans as well to the testing to match the number of intake fans on the Silverstone RL06. Here we're using AIDA64 to stress test the CPU for 20 minutes, and here the Ryzen 7 1700 is overclocked to 3.75 GHz at 1.3 volts as I mentioned earlier. The Silverstone RL06 tops the charts here with an impressive score at 81.3 degrees C for the CPU, just 0.2 degrees C in front of Fractal Design's Meshify C with the additional fans. Both managed to beat the open test bench since they're getting a good amount of airflow going straight to the CPU cooler. GPU temps are pretty much all within 1 degree of each other, so there's nothing significant there until we look at the stock Meshify C, which is running at 89.6 degrees for the CPU and 39.1 degrees for the GPU. So it's evident that adding those fans in really makes a significant difference and is highly recommended. When looking at a typical gaming load, we see that the results are a lot closer than before. And here the open test bench is better since there aren't really any fans pointed directly at the graphics card to improve airflow in the closed systems. So those are a little bit warmer, but only by about 2 degrees. Here the results are virtually identical again between the Silverstone RL06 and the Meshify C with the additional fans, with the stock Meshify C being another 2 degrees warmer for the CPU and 3 degrees for the GPU. Now, the results become really interesting when we run both CPU load and GPU load programs at the same time to simulate a sort of torture workload, and here we see the difference between each system expand a little bit bigger. At the bottom of the graph, the stock Meshify C is bordering on throttle territory with the overclocked Ryzen 7 1700 taking an absolute beating at 95.7 degrees for the CPU and 76.4 degrees for the GPU. Adding an extra 2 intake fans again helps significantly and is highly recommended, but here it's not enough to catch the Silverstone RL06, which improves temperatures further by about 4 degrees for the CPU and 2 degrees for the GPU. Here the open test bench gives us the best thermals because all of the hot air from the GPU is being dissipated straight away from the system, whereas pretty much any enclosure will trap some of that heat in to some degree. So the Silverstone RL06 is an absolute beast when it comes to airflow out of the box and is significantly cooler than the Meshify C at stock. When matching the total fans in the system though, the Meshify C is as good as the Silverstone RL06 in separate CPU load and gaming load scenarios, but the torture workload does have the RL06 a few degrees cooler. Alright, now what about noise? I didn't record anything at idle since all systems were pretty much dead silent and have really good sound insulation. Here I've got the microphone 30 centimeters away from each side panel, and here's what they sound like at full gaming load, starting with the stock Meshify C. Alright, let's take a look at the waveforms to get a closer look. The Meshify C at stock is the quietest as you would expect, with peaks at minus 30 dB, and adding the extra front intake fans increases that to about minus 26 dB, and then the RL06 is slightly louder with peaks at minus 24.5 decibels. So with all the testing said and done, which one should you choose? The Silverstone RL06, even at $99 US, is serious, and I mean serious value. Sure, there's little things like the user manual and the poor cable management, but what I really love about this case is that out of the box, you're just ready to go. The case is populated with tasteful LED fans, and the airflow is literally unbeatable, at least for cases that I've tested or have seen tested by other reviewers. You're also getting a tempered glass side panel and some polished looks, which I can definitely appreciate. This enclosure is for those who want unquestionable airflow or just want a high performance enclosure out of the box without having to worry about case fan choices or anything like that. Then there's the Meshify C, which is much more compact and overall just has a much more premium feel to it. The building experience is superior, and managing your system over time will undoubtedly be easier as well. For isolated tasks like video editing or encoding and also gaming, the Meshify C is on par with the RL06 thermals if you don't mind adding in those extra case fans and tinkering a little bit with optimization. And so the Meshify C also offers pretty solid value for $69, but even more value at $99 or so when adding in 2 of your own case fans to that front intake. So when it comes down to it, if you prefer a fully equipped enclosure out of the box which has unbeatable airflow, where all you have to worry about are your core components, the Silverstone RL06 is for you. If you plan on upgrading your case fans anyway, or prefer a different looking exterior and also wouldn't mind some decent cable management, then the Meshify C is the perfect pick. I hope this guide helped you out, guys. Don't forget to drop your comments down below to let me know which one you would personally pick and why. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.